To the left, we have the LG C2. To the right, we have the LG C1. Now, the LG C1 has been fully calibrated, and I wanted you to see the difference between a calibrated display by a master calibrator and something out of the box, like the LG C2, and basically what you're going to appreciate picture-wise. So now that you see what it looks like before my settings, let me show you what it looks like after. And just like that, we see a massive transformation. She's back from the morgue, she has life in her face again, and she's not looking so pukey green and garbage. Now, what you just saw were the reference standards from 30 years ago that they used to pretty much calibrate all these TVs. Here at Quantum TV, we go beyond reference, and if you want to do that with me and get my settings, make sure you join the membership because you're going to be seeing the best a C2 could possibly look, just like the C1 here to the right. Now, it's important to note that this is a calibrated comparison. This is not default or stock settings or anything like that. So, if you're just looking for a guy to just take TVs out of the box and say everything is awesome, that's not what you're gonna find here. Both TVs have been pushed to their absolute limit. I did want to kind of put that out there just so we're clear and to clarify everything. And with that, we're gonna start with the actual comparison stuff. In terms of black levels, both are absolutely equivalent. They are OLEDs, and it's important to note that there is no black crush coming from one versus the other. So again, that's a real big thing, like making sure we're not losing stars as we go to the next model, because again, these are things that some people can argue. So one of the things I am kind of noticing, I don't know if it's maybe the placebo effect. I don't believe it is. I'm literally looking at it with my naked eye. I do see that by comparison, the C2 to the left has slightly darker black levels, oddly enough, where the C1 focuses on bringing out a little bit more in the way of shadow detail I'm seeing. So the blacks aren't quite as dark as we have on the C2, which is very interesting because they're both OLEDs, but to see the processing work is very interesting. Now, because both are OLEDs, it's important to see if there's any ABL. So as I look at it with my naked eye, there is ABL kicking on very evidently on the LG C2 to the left. Not as bad as we've seen in prior years like 2017, 2018, things like that, but you can see it happen. You can see the transition a lot easier, where on the C1, it's a lot more gradual, where it just kind of turns gray versus like a clear brightness shift that happens on the C2. So if ABL is something that you're worried about, there is an advantage for the C1 over the C2. If you're somebody that watches a lot of nature shows, you're gonna want to go with the LG C1 because when it gets to foliage, that level of geometry tends to trip up the processor on the C2 a lot more. So again, if there is a lot of trees or nature or wildlife, you're probably gonna wanna go more for the C1 just because the processing is a little smoother. So as I do a motion artifact test, I can tell you right now that the LG C2 does tend to have a bit more jitters and judder than we have on the LG C2. This was very apparent when watching TV shows like Demon Slayer, and when there's a lot of geometry that picks up like particle effects from an explosion, you are going to see the processor choke a little bit and see a little bit more jitters. Not judders, but definitely jitters. From a gaming perspective, both TVs are pretty fantastic. So in my time playing games on both these TVs, I haven't found any real issue. However, I do tend to favor the LG C1 a little bit more, simply because the LG C1 has the smoother motion. The C2, however, though, does have clarity. So I think that's something that's it's like nuanced clarity. You really got to search for it, but it does have a clarity advantage over the C1. So the new processor, the Gen 5, definitely has a little, again, it's very slight. It's a little uptick in clarity over the C1, but again, it might be something that matters to you. Now, again, in terms of like when things are moving and it's very fast paced, like you're seeing in a scene like this, where like you've got particle effects flying up, it's just a C1 that just looks a lot smoother as I look at it with my naked eye. It's just a more pleasing picture. Again, that's not to say that the C2 looks bad at all. It looks fantastic. I really love the way the colors look and the clarity. It's absolutely brilliant. And again, looking at both pictures, I don't think anyone could be considered a loser with either of these images. And I think this part is so important to show off because that's the part that kind of goes missing in most comparisons. So again, both TVs are champions in their own right. They just do different things. So hopefully you guys can kind of see that with the gaming aspect. As far as sports are concerned, there's a little bit more in the way of chopping to the LG C2 to the left, when dealing with these panning shots like in football. So if you're a sports buff, the LG C2 is definitely going to struggle a little bit more. In terms of user interface and features, both TVs are very similar. They offer pretty much the same style. I mean, it feels very much like the same TV at a glance. I mean, it really does. So honestly speaking, if that's something that throws you off because you maybe wanted like a new user interface that's like so vastly different, this TV is not going to do that. This is, again, just going to improve on what they kind of already offered, and that's just kind of it. I mean, right down to the apps that they offer, it's pretty similar and equivalent across the board. Now, looking at the game optimizer feature, which is huge for LG, there's a couple new things. So the first thing I want to show you is the kind of picture presets that you get. So you have standard, FPS, you have RPG, and you have RTS, which is real-time strategy. But the only new one this year is sport. So for sports games, that's a new thing they've added. In terms of the menu, they kind of laid it out differently. So you see you have white stabilizer and black stabilizer here. To get to that, you have to go to picture this year, and that's where they put those. I don't know why they broke the menu up like that. It's kind of stupid if I'm giving my honest opinion. But then we go back to the game mode here, and then you see it kind of picks up at the OLED motion. Well, we have OLED Motion Pro here, so I don't know their difference between naming it OLED Motion Pro and just regular OLED Motion on the C2. Again, I don't know the thought process behind that. You turn on user selection and you turn on OLED Motion. You go to OLED Motion Pro and you turn on OLED Motion Pro, and you have like high, medium, and low versus just on or off. So I think maybe that might be something to talk about. Also, there is something important to note here that I am noticing right off the bat. Black frame insertion is way darker on the C2. Like, it's just dark. There is no way around it. It's just freaking dark. Where on the C1, it's bright and very luminous, as you can probably see in the video. I don't know how well you can see that, but you lose a ton of brightness on the C2, and there's no real option outside of like off or on, kind of eliminating it as a feature. So we'll go ahead and turn that back off, and we'll start going back to some of the other options you have here. From the reduced blue light, you still have level 1 and 2, which is good. They didn't kind of gimp you there. In terms of dark room, that's like a new thing they do this year to make the picture dark, but the picture doesn't need to be any darker than it already is. So I really am not understanding their logic with making the picture darker, because again, it's already like super dark. So that's one thing I don't understand. In terms of the input lag, prevent input lag delay, you still have the boost option if you so want, but there's nothing new there. Let's go back here. You still have the dashboard, you still have the AI game sound, you have VRR and G-Sync, you have Async, FreeSync Premium Pro, or FreeSync Premium rather, and then you have the fine-tuned colors for the FreeSync, and then you can change the colors. Unfortunately, you have no new colors this year. They just literally changed the order of it. I don't know what purpose that serves. So instead of violet being first, orange is first, and violet is at the bottom. I mean, they just moved the naming structure around. That's all they did. So it doesn't make any real sense, but that's what they did there. In terms of the user guide, that's still there. So really, it's pretty much the same game optimizer, but the biggest downgrade to game optimizer, which nobody has talked about at length yet, is the fact that when using black frame insertion, you only have on as an option versus here where you can go to low, which basically takes no brightness away. And if I close out of both of these, you'll see just how big of an impact that makes on the picture. We'll go ahead and run back this clip so you can see when the brightness kicks in and it starts up, you can kind of see like there's just a massive decrease in the brightness that you have on the C2 when using the black frame insertion technology, which makes it a useless feature that nobody should really use, because at least, again, this is an opinion here, that nobody should use, because you're throwing away brightness where you didn't have to do that on the C1. And when the C1 is on sale like it is now, it just makes sense in my personal opinion to go for the C1 because of that. In terms of picture quality overall, I'd say both are very similar, but there is in moments like this where the C2 to the left has more clarity and has more depth. So it's going to depend on what kind of content you're watching as to what the picture is going to look like. Again, they are very similar. but there are moments where the C2 can pull ahead of the C1, but the C1 gives me more of a natural picture quality, and then also depth in areas that the C2 doesn't. So it really does depend. So they really do trade back and forth. The C2, however, does present more vibrant colors. So that's something that is a big improvement. They just kind of focus on really trying to get closer, I would say, to what QLEDs do as far as the rich vibrancies. I know red was one of the things I saw a big improvement in. It's not like a day and night improvement over the C1 though. The only color that I really saw a real day and night improvement over the C1 was the way they represent the color yellow. Yellow definitely struggles on the C1, where on the C2 this year, it is improved. But the overall contrast, I think, does take a little bit more of a hit. So I don't know, it's kind of like they do trade blows back and forth. If you're a movie buff, you can rejoice because the picture quality when watching movies on literally both of these are pretty identical. Now, the big thing with the Evo panel this year is that it's not what people think, right? So they advertise the Evo panel as being like this, like, oh my God, it's like, what did they say? Something like 20 or 30% brighter. No. What you're really getting is more honed in highlights. So it gets a lot closer to what Sony does with their highlight rendering. But there are moments like now where I'll pause it here, run that back. You can see the C1 is actually the brighter TV. So it's an inconsistent technology at this point. It's not fully honed in on, because if you look out the window, like you can see way more brightness right here on the C1, where they're on the C2 trying to, I guess, expose for the background more so like over in here. I mean, it's a style of processing that they're going for. But again, most people would probably find the C1 more flattering because you're looking out of a bright window. You'd want to see that bright highlight. That's something the C1 gets really bright. Also, these little highlights back here on these lights are brighter on the C1. So the C1 tends to target brighter highlights in occasions in movies that, again, the C2 is not necessarily going to target. Now, it has clarity, but both have clarity. It's really like a tit for tat kind of game that they play. And it does get very difficult to choose a winner as far as like the movie performance. Now, again, I can't show you the full on movie because of copyright reasons, but you guys kind of understand where I'm going with this. It's like they both do something really incredible. But again, just kind of pausing here, if I look at the colors on the C1, they are more natural than what I get on the C2. The C2 this year tends to target a cooler representation of color. Now, that's not to say that it's a wrong representation of color. That just kind of means that like they're going the route of like, you know, trying to look more like a QLED really. They want the brighter look, and to do that they had to add a little bit more in the way of blue lighting. And again, when you add more light to blue to a WRGB, you're literally just kind of increasing the problem, if I'm being honest with you. And it kind of is falling into that same boat that I was worried about, like where color accuracy would be a problem. But again, if you look at scenes like this, where we go back just a second, it does give you some juiced up color. So if we look at the cyan on the C2 to the left, it is vibrant to its credit, but the C1, to my naked eye, don't know what it's going to show you on camera, has the more realistic shade of cyan. And these are the kind of things I pick up on. Also, the C2 does have a better expression of red. So one of the things I've seen is like, it's like more vibrant, but also it can look a little bit more inaccurate at times. Like now, if I'm being honest, like looking back, kind of standing back and looking at it, I prefer the look of the red on the C2. So it's weird. It's like you're really going to have to pick your poison with this particular television, because on the one hand, it does some things incredibly well, but it also kind of falls short in some areas. Like, I mean, the images right now look identical. They literally look like twins, and I'd be very hard pressed to find any kind of difference whatsoever. I can kind of see that the yellow now on the C2 is more pronounced, but again, that is really pushing it. I've really got to sit here and stare at them, because I'm telling you, in real life, they look extremely identical. And again, just looking at these two TVs, if you look here, the C1 is providing the more natural image. I don't know if I can go back there. I don't think I can go back. But you guys kind of get the idea here. The C1 to the right, again, it's just giving me more of a more natural, more pleasing image. But the C2, they're focusing on vibrancy. So if there's any message that I kind of wanted you guys to take away from that aspect, that would be it. So for TVs, movies and TV shows, that's pretty much what you're going to appreciate out of this set. So all in all, I guess to wrap this up and kind of conclude everything that I've been saying, the C1 targets vibrant colors, They do hone in on highlights in some examples like now a little bit better. But again, if you're watching movies, sometimes that can shift in favor of the C1. So even though it's technically an Evo panel on the C2, it doesn't necessarily always mean that you're going to get the day and night difference. Like even now, the C1 looked better for that particular image. Now the C1 looks better for this particular image. So again, they trade back and forth so very much that it ultimately does end up being a tie with a slight lean towards the C1 for my personal preference and how I like to view images. But if you like something that's a little bit cooler in representation, you like a little bit more blue to your white balance, then absolutely the C2 is going to be something that blows your mind. I don't know, man. I'm kind of like torn because I totally do see the clarity. I see the fluidity behind the motion. But again, we're talking about compared to the C1, which, if I'm being very honest here, is indeed the best TV I have ever seen. And I think like this kind of speaks to LG really came out swinging with the C1, and with the C2, the C1's level is already raised so high, it's really hard to improve on that. They have improved on it, like colors are more vibrant this year, but they do tend to give away a little bit more in the way of some accuracy in some areas. So it's a bit of a hit or miss in some scenes, and it's going to change dramatically depending on the content you watch. And I think for that reason alone, that's what's going to make it a tie. But that being said, I hope this kind of helped you guys out and you can kind of see some of the differences as we're even going through the primary colors. Like again, the green now on the C2 really juiced up. You know, the reds back there were a little bit better on the C1. It's again, it's a tit for tat. But I really hope you guys like comparisons like this, and if you do, make sure you subscribe, join the journey. If you want my settings to see the calibrated results that I have here and to enjoy them, make sure you join the channel membership. I'll put the link down below. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching the #1 brand in honesty. Until the next video, I'll see you guys later.